not going after Warren Jeffs because we disagree with his religious views. We're going after Warren Jeffs because he facilitated the rape of a child.
Hello and welcome to Crime Bytes, the show where we talk about some truly bizarre and disturbing crime cases. My name is Liz and today is True Crime Tuesday. So it's been a little since we've discussed religion and crimes committed in the name of religion, or people using religion as a guise while committing crimes. I got into this story when I got sucked into another one of Netflix's specials, and then many subsequent rabbit holes. This one was called Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey, and it basically gives an in-depth look into the FLDS Church, or the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, and the various crimes that were committed within this church. I've also really wanted to concentrate more on human trafficking on this channel, or at least help to raise more awareness to the issues surrounding human trafficking, and this case deals with that as well. Yay! Plus cults, because although they call themselves a church, most people would call them a cult. And I don't know about you, but for some reason cults just fascinate me. Maybe it's because they just look so bizarre from the outside looking in, but when you see people who are on the inside talking about their experience, you really get the feel that at least some of the members truly believed everything that they were fed wholeheartedly, which in some cases just blows my mind. So, I want to start this episode by addressing polygamy and Mormonism. Before I prepared for this episode, I thought that polygamy was a common and somewhat accepted practice among Mormons even today. Apparently, this is not the case at all for mainstream Mormons. They abandoned the practice when the U.S. government came against it in the late 1800s. In 1890, the current prophet, Wilford Woodruff, had a vision, which apparently is a thing within the religion. The prophets would have visions from God where he would tell them a new way to behave or not to behave in this instance. In this vision from God, he was told that they needed to stop practicing polygamy. He specifically stated that there would be no need for the young men of the church if they continued down this path, which is an issue that will come up later when we look at this breakoff cult. So when he made this announcement, there were some breakoff groups or fundamentalists that decided that they needed to keep practicing polygamy. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sure, they did. But apparently Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, taught that in order to reach the highest level of heaven, the celestial kingdom, if you will, you had to have more than one wife. So for people who truly believed this, obviously they were going to look for a way to continue to practice it. Unfortunately, this would lay ground for the situation that we are going to talk about today. There is just so much to this case, but today we're going to look at a woman who lived it, then escaped from it, and later stood up against it. In 1976, Lloyd Wall and Sharon Steed would give birth to a girl who they would name Rebecca. Rebecca was born into a household that practiced polygamy, and it was actually on the smaller side with only 2 wives and 21 children. Because Rebecca's mother was the second wife, she had almost a lower ranking, and they had their house set up so that her father's first wife and her 9 children lived upstairs, while she lived downstairs with her mother and her other siblings. When she was only 5, she ended up being sexually abused by one of her half-brothers, along with a few of her other sisters. And when this happened, her father's first wife found out about it, and Rebecca said that she was threatened into silence. Her father would deny ever knowing that this took place. Now, because the goal of the men following the FLDS way of life was to obtain more wives, Rebecca's father was not content with only having 2 wives. Apparently, 3 was the minimum magic number of wives that a man needed to obtain the highest level of the celestial kingdom. So, Rulon Jeffs started noticing Rebecca and one of her sisters when she was around 16 years old. Rulon Jeffs was the president or prophet of the FLDS from 1986 to when he died in 2002. Rulon was pivotal to the FLDS church in that basically he took total control of it, whereas before they had up to 7 higher priests, if you will, along with the prophet, and they maintained sort of checks and balances. Well, Rulon did away with that, and in doing so, he ended up with total control of the church. He became the only person who could decide who got married to one another. So you can imagine how this is going to go. He ended up having approximately 75 wives when he died at the age of 92 from a stroke. Ironically, his first legal wife, Zola, divorced him when she discovered that he wanted to practice polygamy back in 1941. So when she was only 19, Rulon Jeffs decided to make Rebecca his 19th wife. He was 85 at the time. After Rebecca married Rulon, her father got his 3rd wife. One thing that struck me about this case was that the parents in this culture just did not educate their children about sex at all, other than to tell them not to let people touch them like that. So when they would get married and be introduced to sex, they would end up being very conflicted. And although some young girls would get to marry a person that they actually wanted to marry, oftentimes they would end up marrying a man who was much older and basically looking at it as their duty. This is what Rebecca had to say about how she handled Rulon.
I knew he was tired, and so I'd have him get in bed, and then I'd rub his feet and get him to sleep. I'd do anything I could to make him fall asleep, and then I would pass by another night without having him touch me. And it worked for a while, until it didn't.
Can you imagine? One of Rulon's key phrases was "keep sweet." It was everywhere, from the songs that the ladies and children would sing to the bottom of his shoes. Which sounds innocent enough, but when you look a little bit deeper, it takes a much darker meaning. Keep sweet was what they said to tell them to be agreeable at all times. So when Rulon passed away in 2002, his son Warren quickly positioned himself to take his father's place as the head prophet. He starts speaking as if he is Rulon renewed, and then having Rulon's wives testify that they think he is the next prophet. As soon as this is solidified, he starts marrying his father's wives. His father's wives. His father's wives. Apparently he married all but 2 of them, and he did not marry his actual mother. So Rebecca was one of the 2 wives that he did not marry. When he told her that he intended to take her as his wife, she decided to run away. She scaled the wall and slid past the guards outside of the Jeffs' house, which was really more like a compound, and she arranged for her brother, who had already escaped, to come pick her up and then get her the heck away from there. And let's just say that seems like it was a great choice, because if you think what I told you so far was wild, it gets even worse when Warren Jeffs takes control. When this happens, things get even more strict for his followers. For example, the limited selection of mainstream books disappeared from Alta Academy, their on-campus school, and the dress code got stricter. Patterns and the color red became prohibited. I'm going to play a video that was created to show women how to do their hair as an example of how these people were living.
No matter what shape your face may be, with these few illustrations, we'll explain to you how to create the perfect oval.
I mean, like every hair in place. We had to learn how to French braid our hair.
So yeah, this is what they were dealing with, which, okay, make people dress and wear their hair however, fine. Not cool per se, but don't abuse children. I digress. Now, in 2002, the Olympics were coming to Salt Lake City, and when that happened, Warren told his followers to gather to Short Creek for the end of the world and God's final judgment. So they sold everything and moved there. About 10,000 people in total. 10,000. This man had a following of 10,000. Let that sink in for a second. When the world didn't end, he said that they had received a second chance and that God had granted them more time to be more righteous. Now we're going to get to the problem that Wilford Woodruff predicted when he was addressing the issue of polygamy in the Mormon Church. If all the wives were being blessed to the elders and higher-ups in the church, who would the young men have to marry? Well, in 2004, over 400 of the boys from ages of 13 to 21 were excommunicated from the church. The excuse was that they were not following the rules of the community and that they were delinquents who were downplaying their behavior. Just get them out. But I mean, who are you trying to fool, you old perverts? Okay, sorry. It was so bad that they were giving the term the Lost Boys. And if this wasn't enough, I'm sorry. If 85 wives wasn't enough to satisfy Warren Jeffs, he also started abusing his own children. His son Roy Jeffs ended up leaving the FLDS after years of careful consideration. His father started sexually abusing him when he was only 8 years old. And as he grew older, he knew that if he ended up getting married, that he would live in a state of constant fear that his father would take his wife or wives away from him, as he did to so many men who displeased him. He did end up leaving the church, only to end up committing suicide in 2019. And there are other reports of other lost boys who committed suicide as well, which is just so sad. Warren started sexually abusing his daughter Rachel when she was only 8 until she was around 16. He decided who she would marry when she was 18, and she met him that night. She married him, becoming his third wife. When she ultimately decided to leave, she had 5 children who she knew that she would never be able to see again. So much. What ended up happening to Warren Jeffs? Obviously, this gross abuse of power wouldn't be able to go on forever, and he was just destroying so many lives. At some point, someone was going to take a stand against it. In 2003, one of his law enforcement officers was convicted of bigamy and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, as he was married to his third wife when she was only 16. This got Warren spooked because he arranged the marriage. He fled the area saying that he needed to experience the world's true evils firsthand. So he would be seen experiencing Mardi Gras, Disneyland, things like that, the ocean. While he was on the run, he continued to run the FLDS church, and Arizona authorities would indict him on felony charges of arranging a marriage between a 16-year-old girl and a man who was already married. A year later, Utah would indict him as well, this time an accomplice to rape when he attempted to arrange a marriage between a 14-year-old girl and her cousin. In 2006, he was placed on the FBI's most wanted list for unlawful flight to avoid persecution, sexual conduct with a minor, conspiracy to commit sexual conduct with a minor, and rape as an accomplice. 3 months later, during a routine traffic stop in Las Vegas, Warren Jeffs was finally captured. He had a bunch of wigs, phones, and over $50,000 in cash with him when he was arrested. Warren Jeffs was scheduled to be tried in both Utah and Arizona for sex crimes against minors, both unsuccessfully, but then he was ultimately sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years in 2011 by the state of Texas after he was found guilty on 2 felony counts of child sexual assault. He denied every allegation brought against him. Rebecca Musser, her name today, and Rachel Jeffs were 2 of the 2 key witnesses against him in court, and in a bold move, Rebecca wore red, the color that he forbade women to wear. Now, let's touch briefly on human trafficking. The United States Department of Justice defines human trafficking as a crime that involves compelling or coercing a person to provide labor or services or to engage in commercial sex acts. The coercion can be subtle or overt, physical or psychological. Exploitation of a minor for commercial sex is human trafficking, regardless of whether any form of force, fraud, or coercion was used. Using this definition, I would make the argument that this is definitely a human trafficking case. Warren Jeffs is still in prison today, and his mental state is in question. Clearly. I mean, in 2007, before he was convicted, he tried to hang himself. Then he almost starved himself to death on 2 different occasions, and one of those times he had to be put in a medically induced coma to save his life. As a result of his imprisonment, he lost a ton of his followers, but ironically, some have become more devout. They consider him a martyr of sorts. He also has published a book entitled Jesus Christ's Message to All Nations, where he proclaims that he is a mouthpiece of God. It is alleged that he still controls the FLDS church from prison. So there's that. There's just so much to this whole case that we barely even scratched the surface with today's rundown. So in the future, maybe we'll get into it more. There are countless other stories about experiences that people have had under both Rulon and Warren Jeffs. It's simply horrifying. If you would like a more in-depth look at these sick pedophiles, now Keep Sweet on Netflix is a great place to start. I'm trying to control myself with this one, I swear, but there's just something about this straight up evil that uses the guise of religion to hurt innocent people, especially children, that just really gets me. So one last thing I'm going to mention is a raid that took place on the El Dorado compound in Texas in 2008. The Zion Ranch, which was a compound of around 800 members, was raided after a phone call from a 16-year-old named Sarah who falsely claimed to be a victim of sexual abuse on the property. Although her claim was false, the property was still raided and 462 children ended up being put in protective custody. Despite all the claims, there was not enough evidence to keep the kids in protective custody if they had not reached puberty yet. Luckily, some of the evidence that was found while searching the property of the ranch was able to be used to persecute some of the people in the community who had participated in illegal underage marriages. And that's going to do it. But as always, let's end today on a more positive note. Today we are going to highlight Rachel and Rebecca one more time. Both ladies are published authors and spokespeople against the FLDS Church and the abuse that they personally went through. Regarding why people stay in cults, Rachel has this to say. Cult members are taught from childbirth that their way of life is the only right way, that the rest of the people in the world are lost to God or the correct way of living. They are taught to scorn the people of the world and their traditions. The cult leaders often prevail through threats, intimidating their followers through the power of fear for the loss of their salvation, telling them what hell awaits all those who do not obey their strict teachings. What do you think about this? Do you think you could ever get sucked into something like this? I just feel sorry for the children growing up thinking this is normal. I will leave you with one final picture and quote from Rebecca Musser. She posted this on her Instagram. Watching Netflix Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey with my daughter. It is hard to find words to describe what it is for us to watch the early stories of my family and life told on screen. She is 14. She has never lived or known FLDS life. The reality of what her life could have been versus what her life is now is one of the greatest gifts and accomplishments of my life. Talk about breaking the cycle. Bravo on so many levels. All right, until next time, stay safe out there, guys. Bye.